Hello and welcome to this IT faculty tech talk on blockchain and how it may impact the accountancy profession. Today I'm joined with David Lyford-Smith from the IT faculty and Aynsley Damery from Clarity Project as well. David, like to introduce yourself and today.
Yeah, well, I'm David Lyford-Smith. As I work with you in the IT faculty here at ICAEW, I am a chartered accountant and I specialise in various different technical topics, including audit technology, tax technology, and of course today's topic, blockchain and cryptocurrency.
Ainsley.
Hi, I'm Aynsley Damery. I'm also a chartered accountant. I left KPMG in the audit of banks and trust companies and set up an accounting firm that specialised in advising small businesses, so it was a very niche advisory accounting firm. And I sold that last year. And I'm currently working in the Clarity Project, so we're developing a platform for small business owners to help them understand their numbers and how to make them better. We're also looking at how to help them develop a business development programme and also connect them to the cash and funding they need to grow and scale their business.
Exciting times. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. So I'd like to start off with a basic question. What is blockchain? David, maybe you can start for us.
So you could certainly give a very technical description of all the various different parts of it, but as an accountant I think of blockchain as an accounting technology. It's a way of keeping track of information, whether it's monetary information or transactions or ownership, things like that, that isn't centered in one place. It's not just sitting on one computer owned by one bank or one lawyer or what have you, but it's spread out, and which is instead spread in lots of places and which is secure, so that it is not going to get, it's much harder to attack and take down than a single server might be.
Okay. Ainsley,
yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely. I mean, that's the easiest way to probably conceptualize it. It's a digital ledger. Mm-hmm. It's on the cloud. It sits on multiple computers at the same time. Same version of that ledger. Mm. It needs a consensus mechanism to approve transactions on the ledger. So we all need to agree whether a transaction is valid or not. It makes it more difficult because of that to actually remove or to hack it. So it's a ledger from an accounting perspective. It's a ledger, very simple.
I've heard sometimes blockchain is called distributed ledger technology for that very reason. So it's another view on it.
And there are non-blockchain types of distributed ledger out there, but realistically at the moment blockchain is the majority case, and actually the label tends to get attached to anything.
Right,
distributed
and there's more than one.
Even
blockchain.
if it's not technically, there are lots of blockchain-ish projects.
Okay.
So
I think it's really as important as well to understand what blockchain can do and how it can help a business and how it can, what the technology can do, rather than get focused on the nitty-gritty of how it works.
Yeah.
Because I think we've discussed this a few times, that people get a little bit obsessed on how blocks fit together, how the transactions are verified, how it works.
Yes.
If we saw a diagram of how our phone worked, it would probably blow our brains, let alone how even email would work. So I think we need to just focus a little bit more on rather than the what it is.
What it is, understood. I think we should be able to explore some of those.
Absolutely.
What it's for. Yeah, I think we should be exploring some of those concepts today and hopefully articulate some of that to our members as well. So David, how does Bitcoin fit into all of this? It's closely associated?
Yeah, it is. And because the names are very similar as well. So Bitcoin is the origin of blockchain a little bit more than 10 years ago, as we're recording, start of 2009, end of 2008. There was a proposal put out for how an online electronic cash system might function, put out by this mysterious person, Satoshi Nakamoto, and they in that described both a record-keeping system that would track how much of this currency everybody would have, which is blockchain, and then also the specific mechanics for how that was going to work, which is Bitcoin, and the actual exact thing. So blockchain runs Bitcoin, but they're not the same thing. It's the system that runs it, and people have used it to make other kinds of cryptocurrencies, other kinds of transactions. It doesn't necessarily have to be that every blockchain has to be really anything like the Bitcoin one. That's just the origin of the idea, and then since then it's gone on to be developed in lots of other places.
So people have taken the technology and adapted it in various ways.
Yeah.
So do you find a lot of people are confuse the two, Bitcoin and blockchain? They see it as being one and the same?
Absolutely. So I'm always, people always talk to me about cryptocurrencies and the validity of a cryptocurrency and how Bitcoin is just blockchain, but blockchain is the underlying technology. So it's what supports what supports a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. But blockchain can record anything of value. So it's not just a currency, it's anything of value that it can record transactions in. And so I think, in the digital age that we're now in, it's revolutionizing how we record and transfer value.
Okay. So there's a real direct link to how accountants see the world in that transfer of value as well. That makes a lot of sense. And David, what's really the difference of blockchain to what's come before? There must be something new here that's really different.
So I often talk about it in terms of the historical ways that we've kept track of different bits of value. We've done things like using coins and notes. We've done things like having a bank that keeps track of a record for everybody, that uses that sort of central person to do it. Or we do things like, mostly we do in supply chains, where each organisation buying and selling is keeping their own record, and then you spend endless time and money arguing with each other to try and resolve discrepancies. Blockchain is a way of saying, well, if we can have a process, a system that we can trust, we can use that and rely on the system instead of having to trust a central person or spend ages doing this manually. So it's about keeping everybody on the same page and agreeing with each other, but without having to have one point of failure or one person who has control over the network, like you do with, for example, with a bank.
Okay. So that element of trust, Aynsley, seems to be quite key to the blockchain, a blockchain.
Huge. So if we think about for example, a trusted organisation such as a library. So we trust that library to hold our data. We trust it to have the right books that it says it has. We trust that they're not going to share that data with anybody else. If they've got our payment details, that they're not going to abuse that or overtake take too many payments. So there's a lot of trust in an institution, for example, like a library. Now, if we were dealing with an organisation that we couldn't trust, or we didn't know whether we could trust them or not, how would we ensure that they were looking after our data properly, that they had what they said they had, that we were able to give them what we said we were able to give them in exchange for that? And so, to be able to peer-to-peer lend books, for example, it would be impossible to do, because one, I wouldn't know whether you had that book.
Right.
You possibly wouldn't know whether I had the money to pay for that book from you. Whereas blockchain would enable that to happen. It would increase that trust, increase that transparency in that transaction.
It's interesting how we go very quickly from a technology towards concepts that many accounting professionals are very familiar with. Transfer of value, trust, all of these security, all of these things, confidentiality, I would assume it comes into play there as well. It's interesting they very quickly come into moving from technology into the real world in this example.
As always, technology is not the point. It's the means to an end.
Okay. So, David, what are the real key attributes then of blockchain?
So I did a report for the IT faculty a year and a bit ago called Blockchain in the Future of Accountancy, and in that trying to summarise what we thought were the most important features, and we came up with a list of three, which are called the 3 Ps, because they all begin with P. So the first is propagation, spreading out this idea that the information starts with one originating party, or one transaction, but spreads out so that every copy, all these different copies that everybody has, and gets synchronized. There's this process that synchronizes things. The second one is permanence, the idea that because of the structure of the data, the way it's written, you can't go back in and edit past information or remove something, so you can trust that the past is the past and that's frozen in place, and that there's no funny business. And the third is programmability. Many blockchains, not all of them, not the Bitcoin one, for example, but most of them also allow you to write other stuff as well. It's not just transactions, but perhaps some programming code, some instructions, some kind of contract that will drive things in the future.
Okay. So, any other thoughts about what you think is the key attributes to?
Well, I suppose from looking at it from a business perspective, it gets rid of intermediaries, potentially.
Oh, I see.
So, for example, if we look at a transaction like a credit card, I think most of us assume that's an instant transaction. But when you go into a shop and you hand over your credit card, that shop has a terminal which connects to the merchant service, which connects to the Visa company or the credit card company, contacts the bank. It then goes to the bank of the actual merchant, and it comes all the way back through the system.
Right.
And so, from going into a shop to actually paying your credit card bill, that whole transaction can take maybe 45 days, for example. Now, obviously, every step of the way, there's somebody doing something, and they're obviously taking some money for that.
Yes,
clearly.
Yeah.
And if we can reduce the level of interactions and increase that trust, so that we reduce those intermediaries, we can often speed up the transaction, reduce the cost of the transaction. And so I think that's quite a huge benefit of blockchain. It's also, I think, the security is the key element. So because that ledger sits on so many computers at the same time, oftentimes in the internet world we have denial of service attacks, so people bombarding servers with requests to try and take them down. Now, if you take down one node on the blockchain, there are 9,999 other nodes there
really matter,
with that ledger available. And also, I suppose the other one is the immutability. So the transaction is fixed and
permanent.
It's permanent. Yeah. So we build blocks on top of one another, and so if you rip out one of those blocks or one of those transactions in that blocks, it's going to break the chain. And we can always see what the longest chain is in a blockchain.
Right.
And so
that's the one we like.
That's the longest chain is always the chain that you go for.
So you talked about the lack of intermediaries, and theoretically this might smooth transactions. It's certainly decentralized in that sense. But I've heard stories that the transaction rate, number of transactions per second of the Bitcoin network is actually really low, certainly compared to a really mature organisations like Visa network for credit card transactions, which is probably tens of thousands per second. Is that an issue in itself, or maybe it's limited to Bitcoin only or something?
I suppose the real answer is it depends.
Oh, okay.
In something like Bitcoin, nobody has any trust in any other person in Bitcoin. They're all totally unknown parties. You have no idea who anybody is.
Yeah.
And so you have to do a lot of securitization to make sure that system is completely incorruptible to be able to do business in that environment. So, and all that security process is very onerous and it takes a lot of energy and time and causes a lot of other trade-offs. Whereas if you were doing something in a business network with a few people in a consortium, all of whom you've kind of vetted before they get access, you don't need to be quite as rigorous. But you're right, I mean, realistically, the transaction limit for Bitcoin is 5 to 8 transactions per second. So it's obviously nowhere near the same as these payments solutions yet. But at the same time, it's not really going to be looking at tackling that. If you compare the cost and throughput of Bitcoin to something like the land registry, it's much, much better. So at the minute, the best applications are those where the current gains in security and efficiency are worth it. Scaling up to something like credit card payments is the end boss. That's the really final challenge for something like that.
Well, we'll come on to some examples of blockchain in use a little bit shortly. So Aynsley,
but also, I mean, scalability is one of the biggest issues that they're tackling, and we talk about this proof of the consensus mechanism. So how we decide whether a transaction is valid or not.
Yes.
And that there are different types of blockchains looking at different types of mechanisms for agreeing the consensus to speed it up to increase the scalability of the blockchain and reduce some of the environmental impacts, which I'm sure we're going to come and discuss a little bit later.
We could do. So is blockchain the answer to everything? There's some number of issues here, Aynsley. What do you think about that?
Well, as a fintech company, I have to say yes. Of course it's going to solve everything. No, absolutely not. It's very important that we understand the use cases. Why are we looking to change a ledger or a database from an existing structure to a blockchain database? Why would we need that ledger system? So we need to understand what we're trying to use it for.
Right.
We also need to understand things like GDPR, for example. So how does that fit into what we're trying to achieve? Does that conflict with what we're trying to do?
Yes.
Scalability, private versus public blockchain. We need to understand, is this something we're keeping within our organization?
Yes.
Like HSBC transferring foreign exchange payments across their banking network. That's a private blockchain, for example. Or is it public like Bitcoin? Do we want to have open transparency across a public network? So we need to think about why we would want blockchain. We probably need to understand the strengths and weaknesses of blockchain to really get to, will this make it better? Because we were talking earlier, and I'm very much, as an accountant, using technology in my firm, and we'd adopted technology at a very early stage. It wasn't technology for technology's sake. It's about how we add value to our clients. It's about how we increase the customer service and the experience. And that's what we use technology for. So it's again the same for blockchain. It's not just this huge amount of hype at the moment, and if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, where blockchain fits, well, actually it's
probably
in the trough
starting
at the
the
moment.
end.
It's on its way down, but people are obsessed about new things and shiny objects, and so we do need to take a step back. We do need to understand what we're trying to achieve here and whether blockchain will actually help that. Okay. Now, I certainly know from my visits out to the States recently, they are talking about the blockchain. I always felt the blockchain was going to be the cherry on top potentially, but they were saying that really to power artificial intelligence, to power the Internet of Things, to create a really stable data structure underlying that blockchain will actually enable that to happen at a much faster rate rather than coming afterwards.
It becomes a bit of an enabler technology in that sense.
A bit lower in the tech stack, a bit more fundamental.
So I'd encourage people to look up the Gartner hype curve if they're not familiar with it. It describes how a technology picks up and then describes phases after that, including the trough of disillusionment and things like this when things don't go quite as perfectly as made. Aynsley, you mentioned about the environmental impact. So the blockchain not necessarily the answer to everything, and there's certain discussions around energy usage for Bitcoin transactions and things like that. Is that one of the concerns as well, do you think? It needs to be addressed?
Hugely. It's a big concern, and it's something that they're really trying to tackle at the moment. Because of the cryptography involved in blockchain and the proof of agreeing a transaction and verifying a transaction, and the level of work and computing effort that goes into that, it does take a lot of energy. And because we are basically allowing the entire network to, at the moment it's called a proof of work, so everybody's fighting to complete the block, and so everybody's chucking a whole heap of energy and computing power to actually solve that puzzle. And certain blockchains are looking at moving to proof of stake, which is basically deciding who's going to solve the puzzle rather than everybody attempting to solve the puzzle.
So energy consumption reduces.
In theory. We've got a lot of forms out there at the moment. It costs a lot of money to actually verify a transaction on some of the blockchains. So it is an issue, it is a concern, but it is something that's being addressed.
Okay, interesting. Any other concerns you think around the use of blockchain, David?
It's also the case that we were talking about permanence, an inability to remove things from the past. That's great for many things, but it's not great for everything. If you want, we were talking about GDPR, for example.
Yes.
If you put something onto a blockchain, it's like publishing it in a national newspaper. It's not coming back. You can't take that out. You can't track down and pulp every copy. It's too late. So we have to be very concerned about people putting illegal data, hacked passwords, personal information, things like this that's stored onto a blockchain that's going into lots and lots of computers and is going out to lots and lots of places.
Right.
You can't really get that back.
Okay.
So there's certainly some concerns about that kind of privacy aspect as well. Okay. That being said, it just means that if you're designing a good blockchain that does need to deal with personal data, it's about, well, what do I put that is on that blockchain and what is not?
Right.
So in Estonia, for example, they track citizen medical records are stored on an offline system, but the access and update rights are all dealt with through a blockchain. Okay. So you've got that very firm record of which doctors and surgeries wanted to read my medical records or wanted to add to them. That's stored in a very secure blockchain system. My actual medical records are in a government database that is not out there to the world, even encrypted.
So a lot of thought needs to be put into how these things are designed and their appropriateness for use and so on. So with all of those considerations that need to be thought up up front, David, what do you think the regulatory landscape is around the use of blockchain? Or is there one at all?
There's not none, but there's certainly a lot less than in some areas. Part of it is because this is a technological solution. It's a way of doing things. It's a process as much as anything. It's not the sort of thing that's easily addressable by regulation, because there's not one person or one organisation or you can knock on the door of as a regulator and say, okay, we want you to do such and such. There are certainly some rules. Several countries, for example, have either outlawed cryptocurrencies or initial coin offerings, which is when companies seek funding by creating their own token or asset or cryptocurrency, something like that. Others have sought to put in a little bit of extra regulation. For the most part, however, it's more a case of careful reading and application of existing rules. For example, in terms of the accounting treatment for if a company holds a crypto asset of some kind, something that's stored on a blockchain. There's not really many countries yet that have a specific accounting standard for that. Likewise for tax treatment, likewise for audit treatment. It's much more about carefully reading through the through the legislation, through what the existing regulations are, and applying them carefully.
Okay. Aynsley, you travel around the world as part of your Clarity project, and have you come across different approaches to regulation in any other territory? Is it significant? Is it a talking point in other territories?
Hugely so. I mean, if we look at technology, first of all, technology generally isn't regulated. So if we're looking at the technology and the blockchain technology itself, then regulation possibly doesn't make sense in relation to that.
Right.
If we look at how people are creating a currency, or how people are raising funds, then that's where we come into regulation. But there is regulation for those sorts of activities anyway.
Oh, I see.
So I think a lot of it is about how the regulators understand these new ways of doing business, these new ways of raising money. There's, without getting into the technical elements of utility versus security tokens versus currency, there's a lot of hybrid models going around at the moment. People are coming up with innovative ways to use blockchain. And so I suppose it's more about understanding the underlying, what's going on and what regulation already exists for that and how that's adapted for blockchain, the umbrella term for blockchain in the industry wide. And I know certainly, for example, the SEC in the US has tried to understand the raising of funds and apply existing regulation and legislation to what people are doing in blockchain.
Okay. Aynsley, we were talking about examples in the real world. Have you got any other examples you can share with us as well of blockchain?
Well, I think the Big Four are testing audits in Taiwan at the moment, so that's obviously we're going to come on to the impact on the auditing and accounting professions in a little bit, but that's an interesting extension of blockchain. There's a lot talked about triple entry bookkeeping, and I think we're a long way away from that. And so we talked about triple entry. Well, the triple entry will be the blockchain and being able to I suppose have real-time transactions across the same ledger. So we won't all need to keep our own ledgers effectively. But I think we are a way away from that. Certainly there's been, we know that there's been voting systems, so people have trial voting. There's been storage of medical records. At the Clarity project, we're actually looking at how we can help business owners create an online data room. So for all their governance documents. The documents themselves won't be shared and put on the blockchain. Right. It's more the verification of those documents. So the signatures of those documents and the time stamping of those documents would be transferred across the blockchain. We've talked about public versus private information, GDPR, and all those things are really, really important and need to be understood how they impact on blockchain. So,
Okay, interesting. David, you just touched earlier on the land registry as an example of a low transaction volume system that needed to be secure as well.
And there's several different countries have looked into this. The Dubai Land Registry Office is actually using some blockchain system for land registry now. And this is something where there's a lot of parties that need to be involved, and blockchain solutions are usually those where there's a lot of different parties involved. That's that kind of network or consortium situation where blockchain is more advantageous. They don't want to have it centralized because of the kind of costs of maintenance involved. And the transaction volume compared to something like card payments is very, very low. The cost of individual transactions is quite high. So blockchain is already a good competitor for those things. Where these projects have had more difficulty is that the permanence is really an important aspect for things like land registry. You want to be able to rely on what the land registry says, particularly if you're talking about in, for example, countries where you've got oil fields and things like this, which do change hands quite a lot, and not all of those changes of hands are legitimate. So having that security is really important, but you also, of course, have the problem of legal acceptance and backing, because it's all well and good if you've created a blockchain system that says that such and such a person owns such and such a plot of land or a building, but if there's somebody with a rifle in the building that says it's theirs, the blockchain doesn't necessarily help you. So you can remove about, I don't have to worry about paying a bribe to an official so that they don't pervert this land purchase. I do have that advantage because I've got this secure, directly actionable, unchangeable system. But unless it also stands up in courts and it's enforceable, it doesn't actually solve the problem.
Okay. So you took the permanence element of it.
Yeah.
But I would add a fourth P, provenance. In a sense,
Yeah.
it becomes proving a chain of provenance as well.
Yeah, you can track all these changes of transaction. You can see all these things. It's not like if I send money to the wrong person by accident in a blockchain system, I can never get it back. It just means they have to send it back to me.
Yes.
They have to willingly send that, and both of those transactions will be in the blockchain.
Right.
I can't just remove the transaction as if it never happened, so there'll always be an evidence of that. Those two payments will always be there, but it doesn't mean that the money can't come back to me.
No, so land could change hands,
Oh, yeah.
that difficult. Aynsley,
It's the same as cash, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if I accidentally give you £20 rather than you £20, I am reliant on you giving me that note back to be able
Absolutely.
to give to you. So it's much the same.
So the use of blockchain isn't so far removed from many real-world examples of transactions that happen today.
It's not, and actually it's almost shouldn't be a surprise, because the original white paper that Nakamoto released in 2008 talks about an electronic cash system, not a monetary system, not a currency system, a cash system. It's very much about trying to create something which has the physical usefulness that cash has, where you can just transfer peer-to-peer, as IT people say, or person-to-person, as normal people say. You can just hand something over. But that's actually quite difficult to do online, because you don't know who the other person is. You don't know if they've said that they're going to give that money to 8 people and only have one pot of money to spend. It's much, much more tricky to orchestrate that. But actually, a lot of things in blockchain are quite similar to how they work in just physical paper money.
Okay.
Yes, in fact, the banks, I understand the Bank of England is looking to replace CHAPS using blockchain.
The clearing system.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting use of blockchain, as we were talking about where blockchain comes in. And HSBC has transferred large amounts of FX transactions last year, interbank. So we talked about when we were talking about private versus public blockchain.
Yeah, so there are some moderate volume transactions, foreign exchange, interbank, that's probably moderate volume, high volume with Bitcoin, and low volume rates with land registry.
Yeah.
So it's applicable to a number of use cases.
Yes.
Yeah.
And not all these things have to be the same shape, in terms of the amount of trust that you put in each other, in terms of is this something that everybody could use, or only select people can use, or only just within an organisation. There's different levels of what you can design to, and those all end up having different solutions to how the security works and how the costs work out. Okay. It's not just one monolithic way of doing things.
We could set up a blockchain between the three of us and decide that you had the ultimate control over whether the transaction got verified or not.
Yeah.
And we could write that into the code. So we determine the rules of the blockchain. It's not necessarily we're using somebody else's rules, we can actually determine.
Oh, I see, yeah. So the design and implementation can be very specific to a business or an organisation as well. So it really comes down to one of the key aspects, as a reason for talking today, is around how will this technology really impact the profession? Aynsley, if I can start with you.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time for the profession. I'm a huge fan of technology, as we've said, not for technology's sake, but for the reduced workload, enabling people to focus on more exciting work. So I see blockchain as a way of reducing workload, getting rid of all the silly ticking and bashing that might have gone on in the old days from an audit perspective, and allow us to actually spend our time on what's really important to our clients and to businesses in general. Okay. So that's the advisory side. So, I see blockchain giving us better data to give better financial advice. And better business advice to our clients, ultimately.
Ultimately, yeah. Maybe not today, but maybe at some point, yeah. But that's about the future as well. David, how do you see blockchain impacting the profession?
I think it affects accountants in a couple of different ways. Firstly, I think as users of blockchain systems, as Aynsley's describing, to be able to shift from having to do spot inspection and testing, it's much more, as an auditor, I think, a bit more like systems testing. It's like, if I can establish that a given blockchain system is doing what it says and working properly, I can then impart trust on the outputs of that system, and I don't need to then go and also check all those individual results as well. I have some sense that some of my transactional assurances, if I'm an auditor, are covered. So I think there's certainly a shift in that respect. In this transitional period, we're also seeing that accountants are looking to provide assurance over blockchain systems. So if a company is looking to say, we want to take on this blockchain system, we want to join up to an industry-wide shipping insurance consortium project, we need somebody to check through all this and make sure that it's all working properly, and there's some aspects of that are software based, and obviously there'll be software developers checking that the code is properly put together, but there's also a lot of business case and rules based systems that need investigating and assuring to say, yes, this is going to do what we think it's going to do, and yes, it's going to be worth doing.
So the traditional skills an accounting professional may have today with regards to audit and critical thinking, asking the right questions, that they continue to be applicable then?
Absolutely. People sometimes say that blockchain will replace all of audit, for example, and I think that shows it's quite a naive view of what audit is. Certainly it means that we don't have to worry about, did this invoice for this much, does the customer agree with the amount? That kind of transactional level detail is quite straightforward.
Right.
But there's still a lot of other much more interesting questions. I mean, my blockchain might say that I know that my customer agrees with the amount of the invoice I sent them, but my blockchain is not going to help me know whether or not my customer is ever going to pay, or if they're going to go into administration the next week and abscond or will not pay it. So there's still plenty of questions. It's just removing some of what we think of as the rote questions and getting to the more interesting ones.
So it's just a tool. Aynsley, how do you see it?
Absolutely, yeah. So obviously there's the tax question. So that's quite an important one at the moment. People are making gains on cryptocurrencies or making losses potentially at the moment. So it's important to understand how to advise clients on the tax aspect of that.
I see,
it's also critical, I think, for people to switch their thought process, and that blockchain companies are startups and fintech companies by themselves. They still need support and advice and hand-holding.
Yes. Yeah.
They need the advisory work that most other businesses need, and particularly around systems. So we've seen where founders have had sole signatory over some currencies, digital currencies. That's critical. So from an audit perspective, we could add massive value to those businesses.
Yeah.
So is advising business about the technology, how it's used, overseeing it, also
controls and procedures,
and having and also I guess the point is it's about having an understanding of the technology, even at a fairly rudimentary level, to ensure that if you speak to a client who's making use of this, you have an understanding of what it's trying to do and the critical aspects of it.
Yes, exactly that.
And can I just mention as well smart contracts? So we didn't talk about smart contracts. And so that goes back to the testing and the auditing and the review. So, you're probably better explaining smart contracts than I am, but effectively a smart contract is a normal contract that's written in code that sits on a blockchain, and when certain milestones are hit, certain things happen.
I see.
So we could say that if I do this, then you pay me.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
It's all about that automation. It's like, I think of it as being like a sort of a vending machine. A vending machine lets me buy a chocolate bar from someone who's not there because it's automatic. I put in the money, I press the button, and it automatically dispenses a chocolate bar.
Right.
But it's all done in software. So it says, if you put this amount of money into this account, I will release a download code for a new album or whatever it might be. It's all about automation in the blockchain that lets you again increase automation, reduce intermediaries, reduce paperwork, make things simpler.
I mean, land registry would be an example.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can do something like an escrow account without needing to involve any lawyers. So.
Where can people find out more about blockchain?
Well, so the ICAEW actually has a hub page with all of our blockchain related information. That's icaew.com/blockchain.
Okay.
And you can find all of the different accounts and reports there. There's guidance on cryptocurrencies as well as blockchain. And the report, which I mentioned earlier that I wrote, Blockchain and the Future of Accountancy, is also the principal thing you'll find there. So I mentioned the 3 Ps earlier: propagation, permanence, programmability, in-depth explanation of everything about that. All of that address.
That's a free download for members?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, actually, the Blockchain in the Future of Accountancy is free to anyone.
It's part of our thought leadership work.
It is indeed, yes.
Aynsley, where can they find out more about Clarity Project?
Well, primarily online, as you'd expect. So clarityproject.io is a really good place to start. They can download the white paper and understand a little bit more about how we're using blockchain technology.
Thank you very much. So thank you to David and Aynsley for joining us today to talk about blockchain and the future of accountancy. In the next few months, we have a couple more videos. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity and ultimately the uses of data, particularly big data. A couple more videos to come later in the year in this Tech Talk series. Otherwise, like, share and subscribe to this video, and hopefully you enjoyed it and found it useful. Thank you.